The Form of Value, Appendix to Volume 1, First Edition of Capital. The form of value. The analysis of the commodity has shown that it is a doublet, use value and value. So in order for a thing to possess commodity form, it must possess doublet form. The form of a use value and the form of value. The form of the use value is the form of the commodity body itself, iron, linen, etc. Its palpable, sensible form of existence. What this is the natural form of the commodity. The value form of the commodity, on the other hand, is its social form. How is the value of a commodity expressed? That is, how does it attain appearance form of its own? By the relationship of different commodities. In order to analyze the form contained in such relationship correctly, we must take its simplest, most undeveloped shape as our point of departure. The simplest relationship of a commodity is obviously its relationship to one other single commodity, regardless to which. The relationship of two commodities, therefore, provides the simplest value expression for a commodity. The simple value form, 20 yards of linen is equal to 1 coat. 20 yards of linen are worth 1 coat. Section 1. The two poles of the value expression, relative value form and equivalent form. In the simple value expression, the two commodity types, linen and coat, obviously play two different roles. Linen is the commodity which expresses its value in a commodity body different from its own, the coat. On the other hand, the commodity type coat serves as the material in which value is expressed. One of the commodities plays an active role and the other a passive. Now, of the commodity which expresses its value in another commodity, we say its value is manifested as relative value, or it is situated in relative value form. Of the other commodity, however, the coat in this case, which serves as material for the value expression, we say it functions as equivalent of the first commodity, or it is situated in equivalent form. Without analyzing any more deeply at this point, the following points are, as such, perfectly clear. A. The inseparability of both forms. Relative value form and equivalent form are inseparable moments of the same value expression, moments which belong to one another and determine each other reciprocally. B. The polarity of both forms. On the other hand, both these forms are mutually excluding, or opposed extremes, that is, poles. the same value of the same value expression, they apportion themselves in each case among the different commodities, which the value expression relates to one another. For example, I cannot express the value of linen in linen. 20 yards of linen equals 20 yards of linen is no sort of value expression, but expresses at most a definite quantum of use object, linen. The value of linen thus can only be expressed in another commodity, that is, only relatively. The relative value form of linen thus presupposes that some other commodity is situated in the equivalent form as it confronts linen. On the other hand, this other commodity, the coat in this case, which figures as equivalent of linen, and thus is situated in equivalent form, cannot be situated at the very same time in relative form. It is not that the commodity expresses its own value. It only provides the material for the value expression of another commodity. Consider the expression 20 yards of linen is equal to one coat, or 20 yards of linen are worth one coat. We grant that it includes also the converse relationship. One coat equals 20 yards of linen, or one coat is worth 20 yards of linen. But in this case, I must reverse the equation in order to express the value of the coat in a relative way. And as soon as I do that, the linen becomes the equivalent instead of the coat. Hence, the same commodity cannot appear in the same value expression at the same time in both forms. Rather, these latter exclude each other in the manner of poles. Let us consider transactions of exchange between linen producer A and coat producer B. Before they unite in their transaction, A says 20 yards of linen are worth 2 coats. 20 yards of linen equals 2 coats. But B says 1 coat is worth 22 yards of linen, or 1 coat is equal to 22 yards of linen. Finally, after they have haggled for a long time, they come to agreement. A says 20 yards of linen are worth 1 coat, and B says 1 coat is worth 20 yards of linen. In this case, both linen and coat are situated at the same time in relative value form and in equivalent form. But note carefully, the circumstance obtains for 2 different persons and in 2 different value expressions, which entered only at the same time into existence. As far as A is concerned, his linen, we speak this way because the initiative has its origin in the linen owner's commodity for him, is situated in relative value form, that it is the commodity of the other person, the coat, on the other hand, which is situated in equivalent form. It is the other way around from the standpoint of B. The same commodity thus never, not even in this case, possesses both forms at the same time in the same value expression. Relative value and equivalent are both only forms of commodity value. Whether now a commodity is situated in the one form or in the other in polar opposition depends exclusively upon its place in the value expression. This appears strikingly in the simple value form, being presently considered by us. As far as content is concerned, both expressions, 20 yards of linen equals 1 coat, or 20 yards of linen are worth 1 coat, and the other expression, 1 coat equals 20 yards of linen, or 1 coat is worth 20 yards of linen, are by no means different. As far as form is concerned, they are not only different, but opposed. In expression number 1, the value of linen is expressed relatively. Thus it is situated in the relative value form, which is at the same time the value of the coat, is expressed as equivalent. It thus is situated in the equivalent form. If I turn expression 1 around, I obtain expression 2. The commodities change places, and straightway the coat is situated in relative value form, and the linen, on the other hand, in equivalent form, because they have changed respective places in the same value expressions. They have exchanged their value form. Section 2, the relative value form. A. Relationship of equality. Since it is the linen which is to express its value, the initiative has its point of departure in the linen. The linen enters into a relationship with the coat, that is, to some other commodity of a different type than itself. This relationship is a relationship of equalizing. The basis of the expression 20 yards of linen equals 1 coat, in reality, linen equals coat, a circumstance which put into words means only the commodity type coat is of the same nature, substance as the linen, a commodity type which differs from it. One for the most part overlooks that, because one's attention is absorbed by the quantitative relationship, that is, by the determinate proportion in which one type of commodity is equated to the other. One forgets that magnitudes of different things are only quantitatively comparable after their reduction to the same unit. Only as expression of the same unit do they have the same denominator, and are hence commensurable quantities. In the above expression, the linen relates itself thus to the coat as to something like itself, or the coat is related to the linen as a thing of the same substance, having a like essence. It is set qualitatively equal to the linen. B. Relationship of value. The coat is only the same as the linen insofar as both are values. The fact that the linen relates itself to the coat as to something equal to itself, or that it is a thing of the same substance, that the coat is equated to the linen, expresses that the coat counts in this relationship as a value. It is equated to the linen insofar as it is value, just as much as the linen is. The relationship of equality is thus relationship of value. But the value relationship is above all expression of the value, or the value being of the commodity, which expresses its value. As use value or commodity body, the linen is distinct from the coat. Its value being, however, becomes visible, expresses itself in a relationship in which another commodity type, the coat, is set equal to it or counts as being of equal essence to it. C. Qualitative content of the relative value form contained in the value relationship. A coat is only value insofar as it is a reified expression of the human labor power expended in its production, and is thus a coagulation of abstract human labor, abstract labor, because abstraction is made from the determinate useful concrete character of the labor contained in it, human labor, because in this case labor counts only as expenditure of labor power in general. Linen thus cannot relate itself to the coat as to a value thing, or cannot be related to the coat as value, without being related to it as a body whose only matter consists in human labor. But as value, the linen is coagulation of the same human labor. Within this relationship, the body, coat, thus represents the value substance which is common to it, and the linen, that is human labor. Within this relationship, the coat thus counts only as form of value, and therefore also as value form of the linen, as sensible appearance form of the linen value. In this way, through mediation of the value relationship, the value of a commodity is expressed in the use value of another commodity, that is, in another commodity body different from itself. D. Quantitative determinacy of the relative value form contained in the value form. The 20 yards of linen, however, are not only value in general, that is, coagulation of human labor, but are value of determined magnitude, that is, a determined quantum of human labor is objectified in them. In the value relationship of the linen to the coat, the commodity type coat is not qualitatively equated to the linen merely as value body in general, i.e. as incarnation of human labor, but as a determinate quantum of this value body. One coat, not 12 coats, etc., insofar as precisely as much value substance or human labor resides in one coat as in 20 yards of linen. E. The totality of the relative value form. Through the relative value expression of the value of the commodity, thus obtains in the first place a form which differs from its own use value. The use value of this commodity is, for example, linen. It possesses its value form, however, in its relationship of equality to the coat. Through this relationship of equality, another commodity body differing from it in a sensibly perceptible way becomes the mirror of its own value being, its own value structure. In this way, it achieves a value form independent, autonomous, and differing from its natural form. But in the second place, as value of determined magnitude, as determined value magnitude, it is measured quantitatively by the quantitatively determined relationship or the proportion in which the other commodity body is equated to it. Section 3, the equivalent form. A, the form of immediate exchangeability. As values, all commodities are equivalent expressions of the same unity which are replaceable or interchangeable by one another, this unity being that of human labor. A commodity is therefore exchangeable with another commodity in general, insofar as it possesses a form in which it appears as value. A commodity body is immediately exchangeable with another commodity insofar as its immediate form, i.e., its own body or natural form, presents value or counts as value structure with respect to another commodity. The coat possesses this property in the value relationship of linen to it. The value of the linen would not otherwise be expressible in the thing coat. The fact that a commodity thus has equivalent form in general means only, by virtue of its place in the value expression, its own natural form counts as value form for some other commodity, or it possesses the form of immediate exchangeability with some other commodity. There is thus no necessity of its first assuming a form differing from its immediate natural form in order to appear as value, to count as value for some other commodity, and to have the effect upon the other commodity that a value has. B, quantitative determinacy is not contained in the equivalent form. As to the fact that a thing which has the form coat is immediately exchangeable with linen, or a thing which has the form gold is immediately exchangeable with all other commodities. This equivalent form of a thing contains no quantitative determinacy whatsoever. The opposite erroneous view arises from the following causes. First, the commodity coat, for example, which serves as material for the value expression of linen, is also always quantitatively determined as one coat, not 12 coats, etc. But why? Because the 20 yards of linen in their relative value expression are not only expressed as value in general, but are measured at the same time as a determined value quantum. The fact, however, that one coat, not 12 coats, contains as much labor as 20 yards of linen, and is therefore equated to the 20 yards of linen, has nothing whatsoever to do with the characteristic property of the commodity type coat of being immediately exchangeable with the commodity type linen. Second, if 20 yards of linen are expressed as value of determined magnitude in one coat, the value magnitude of one coat is reciprocally expressed in 20 yards of linen, is thus measured in a similarly quantitative way, but only indirectly by reversal of the expression. Not to the extent that the coat plays the role of the equivalent, but rather to the extent that it manifests its own value in a relative way in the linen. Third, we can express the formula 20 yards of linen equals one coat, or 20 yards of linen are worth one coat, also as follows. 20 yards of linen and one coat are equivalents, or both are equally large values. In this case, we are not expressing the value of any one of the two commodities in the use value of the other. Neither of the two commodities is therefore posed in equivalent form. Equivalent means in this case only something equal in magnitude, after both things have previously been implicitly reduced to the abstraction value in our head. C. The peculiarities of the equivalent form. 1. First peculiarity of the equivalent form. Use value becomes the appearance form of use value's opposite, value. The natural form of the commodity becomes the value form. Hold on. The natural form of the commodity becomes the value form. But note well, this quid pro quo takes place for a commodity B, coat or wheat or iron, etc., only within the value relationship, in which any other commodity A you choose, linen, etc., confronts it only within this relationship. In itself, considered in isolation, the coat is only a useful thing, use value just like that the linen, and its coat form is therefore only a form of use value or natural form of a particular commodity type. But since no commodity can relate itself to itself as equivalent, and thus can also not make its own natural skin into the expression of its own value, therefore it must relate itself to another commodity as equivalent, or make the natural skin of another commodity body into its own value form. To clarify this matter, let us take the example of a measure, which applies to the commodity bodies as commodity bodies, that is, as use values. A sugar cube, because it is a body, is heavy, and therefore has weight, but one cannot see or feel a sugar cube's heaviness. We now take various pieces of iron whose weight has been previously determined. The commodity form of iron, considered in itself, is just as little an appearance form of heaviness as is that of the sugar cube. Nevertheless, in order to express the sugar cube as heaviness, or weight, we put it into a weight relationship to iron. In this relationship, the iron counts as a body, which expresses nothing except heaviness or weight. Iron quanta serve therefore for a weight measure of sugar and represent over against the sugar cube mere heaviness structure, appearance form of heaviness. This role is played by iron only within the relationship in which the sugar or some other body whose weight is to be found confronts it. If both things were not heavy, they could not enter into this relationship, and the ones consequently could not serve for the expressionist. If both things were not heavy, then they would not enter into this relationship, and the ones consequently could not serve for the expression of the heaviness of the other. If we place both into a balance, then we really see that they are as heaviness the same, and therefore are in determined proportion also of the same weight. Just as in this case, the iron body represents only heaviness to the sugar, so in our value expression, the coat body represents only value to the linen. 2. Second peculiarity of the equivalent form. Concrete labor becomes the appearance form of its opposite, abstractly human labor. The coat counts as value body in the linen's value expression, and the coat's body, or natural form, therefore, counts as value form. That is, thus, as embodiment of homogeneous human labor, of human labor as such. The labor, however, by which the useful thing coat is made and obtains its particular form is not abstractly human labor as such, but a particular, useful, concrete type of labor, tailoring. The simple relative value form demands that the value of a commodity, for example linen, be only expressed in one single other commodity type. Just which the other commodity type is utterly indifferent for the simple value form. The linen value could have been expressed in the commodity type wheat instead of the commodity type coat, or instead of in the commodity type wheat in the commodity type iron, etc. But regardless of whether it were coat, wheat, or iron, the equivalent of linen would always count as value body to the linen, and therefore as embodiment of human labor as such. And the particular body form of the equivalent, whether coat, wheat, or iron, would always remain not an embodiment of abstractly human labor, but a particular concrete useful type of labor, whether that of tailor, farmer, or mine worker. The particular concrete useful labor, which produces the commodity body of the equivalent, must therefore always count necessarily in the value expression as particular realization form or appearance form of human labor as such, that is, of abstractly human labor. The coat, for example, can only count as value body, and therefore as embodiment of human labor as such, insofar as tailoring counts as determinate form, in which human labor power is expended, or in which abstractly human labor realizes itself. Within the value relationship and the value expression included therein, the abstractly universal does not count as property of within the value relationship and the value expression included therein, the abstractly universal does not count as property of what is concrete, the sensibly real. But the opposite holds. What is sensibly concrete counts as mere appearance form or determinate realization form of the abstractly universal. It is not that tailoring labor, which resides, for example, in the equivalent coat, possesses within the value expression of linen the universal property of also being human labor. The opposite holds. Being human labor counts only as appearance form or determinate realization form of this essence of human labor. This quid pro quo is unavoidable because the labor manifested in the labor product is only value constructing insofar as it is homogeneous human labor, with the result that labor objectified in the value of a product is in no way distinguished from the labor objectified in the value of a different kind of product. This inversion, whereby the sensibly concrete counts only as appearance form of the abstractly universal, and it is not to the contrary that the abstractly universal counts as property of the concrete. This inversion characterizes the value expression. At the same time, it renders difficult its comprehension. If I say Roman law and German law are both law, that is obvious. But if I say, on the other hand, the law, the abstract entity, realizes itself in Roman law and German law, these concrete laws, then the connection becomes mystical. Excuse me. Drink time. 3. Third peculiarity of the equivalent form. Private labor becomes the form of private labor's opposite, becomes labor in an immediately social form. Labor products would not become commodities if they weren't products of private labors, which are applied independently of one another and stand on their own. The societal connection of these private labors exists materially, insofar as they are members of an indigenous social division of labor, and therefore by their products satisfy those different kinds of needs out of the totality of which the similarly indigenous system of social needs consists. This material social connection of private labors, applied independently of one another, is, however, only mediated, and therefore only realizes itself by the exchange of the products of those private labors. The product of private labor, therefore, has social form only insofar as it has value form, and therefore has the form of exchangeability with other labor products. It has immediately social form insofar as its own corporeal or natural form is at the same time the form of its exchangeability with another commodity, or counts for another commodity as its value form. This, however, as we have seen, only takes place for a commodity if it is situated, thanks to another commodity's value relationship to it, in equivalent form, or plays the role of the equivalent with regard to another commodity. The two peculiarities of the equivalent form, of which we have just given the development, will become even more comprehensible if we go back to the great investigator who was the first to analyze the value form, as he was the first for so many forms of thought of society of nature, and did so for the most part more felicitously than his modern followers. We mean Aristotle. In the first place, it is Aristotle who clearly enunciates that the money form of the commodity is only the more developed structure of the simple value form, i.e., of the expression of value of a commodity in some other random commodity, since Aristotle says 5 beds equals 1 house, does not differ from 5 beds equals so and so much money. Further, he detects that the value relationship in which this value expression lurks provides on its side the precondition for the houses being qualitatively made equal to the bed, and that these sensibly differing things, without such a quality of essence, would not be relatable to one another as commensurable magnitudes. The exchange, Aristotle says, quote, cannot be without equality, but equality cannot be without commensurability, end quote. Aristotle. At this point, he balks and abandons the further analysis of the value form. Quote, it is, however, in truth, impossible that such differing kinds of things be commensurable, end quote, i.e., qualitatively equal. This equalizing can only be something foreign to the true nature of things, and thus only a, quote, assistance for practical need, end quote. Thus Aristotle himself tells us why his further analysis fails. Namely, it fails for lack of the value concept. What is the equal thing, i.e., the communal substance that the house presents for the bed in the value expression of the bed? Such a thing, quote, is in truth impossible to exist, end quote, says Aristotle. Why? The house presents that which is really equal in both the bed and house. And what that is human labor. Aristotle could not, however, read off the top of the value form of commodities the fact that in the form of commodity values, all labors are expressed as equal human labor, and consequently as counting as equal, because Greek society was based upon slave labor, and consequently had as its natural basis the inequality of men and their labors. The mystery of the value expression, the equality and equal validity of all labors, because and insofar as they are human labor in general, can only be deciphered once the concept of human equality comes to possess the stability of a popular prejudice. That is, however, only first possible in a society in which the commodity form is the universal form of the labor product, and therefore in which the relationship of human beings to one another as commodity owners is the predominating social relationship. The genius of Aristotle shines forth precisely in the fact that he discovers an identity relationship in the commodity expression of commodities. Only the historical limit of the society in which he lived prevented him from uncovering just in what this identity relationship consists, quote, in truth. Fourth peculiarity of the equivalent form. The fetishism of the commodity form is more striking in the equivalent form than in the relative value form. Through the fact that labor products, such useful things as coat, linen, wheat, iron, etc., are values, determined value magnitudes, and, in a word, commodities. For that reason, properties which inhere in them naturally only in our traffic with one another are not derived from nature, as is the property of being heavy or being retentive of heat or being nourishing. But within our traffic, these things behave to one another as commodities. They are values. They are measurable as value magnitudes, and their common value property places them in a value relationship to one another. The fact now that, for example, 20 yards of linen is equal to one coat, or 20 yards of linen are worth one coat, this fact only expresses that one, the labors of different type, which are necessary for the production of these things, count equally as human labor. 2. That the quantum of labor expended in their production is measured in accordance with determined social laws, and that tailors and weavers, and 3, that tailors and weavers enter into a determined social production relationship. It is a determined social relating of the producers, in which they set their different useful types of labor equal as human labor. It is not to a lesser extent a determined social relating of the producers, in which they measure the magnitude of their labors by the duration of the time of the expenditure of human labor power. But within our traffic, these social characters of their own labor appear to the producers as social natural properties, as objective determinations of the labor products themselves. The equality of the human labors appears as the value property of the labor products. The measure of the labor by the socially necessary labor time appears as value magnitude of the labor products. And finally, the social relating of the producers through their labors appear as value relationship, or social relationship of these things, the labor products. Just for this do the labor products appear to them as commodities, sensibly supersensible, or social things. For example, the light impression of a thing upon the optic nerve does not manifest itself as subjective excitation of the optic nerve itself, but as objective form of a thing outside the eye. But in the act of seeing, what happens in reality is that light is thrown from a thing, the external object, onto another thing, the eye. It is a physical relationship between physical things. In distinction from this, the commodity form and the value relationship of the labor products have absolutely nothing to do with their physical nature and the material relationships which are derived from it. It is only the determined social relationship of men itself, which in this case assumes for them the phantasmagoric form of a relationship of things. Thus, in order to find an analogy, we must flee into the nebulous region of the religious world. Here it is that the products of the human head appear like independent structures, endowed with their own life and standing in relationship to one another and to men. That is the way it is in the commodity world with the products of the human hand. This is what I call the fetishism, which clings to labor products as soon as they are produced as commodities, and which is thus inseparable from commodity production. The fetish character, to be sure, reveals itself much more strikingly in the equivalent form than in the relative value form. The relative value form of a commodity is mediated, namely through its relationship to another commodity. Through this value form, the value of the commodity is expressed as something completely different from its own sensible existence. There is at the same time the aspect that the value being can only be relating which is foreign to the thing itself, and its value relationship to another thing can only therefore be the appearance form of a social relationship concealed behind. It is the other way around with the equivalent form. It consists precisely in the fact that the corporeal or natural form of a commodity counts immediately as social form, as value form for another commodity. Within our traffic with one another, it thus appears as social natural property of a thing, as a property inhering in it from nature. The property of possessing equivalent form, consequently of being, just as it exists in sensible manner, immediately exchangeable with other things. Because, however, within the value expression of commodity, the equivalent form inheres in commodity B from nature. It appears to belong to the latter from nature, even outside this relationship. Hence, for example, the riddling character of gold, which appears to possess, along with its other nature properties, its color, its specific gravity, its non-oxidizability in air, etc., also the equivalent form from nature, that is, the social quality of being immediately exchangeable with all other commodities. Section 4. As soon as value appears independently, it has the form of exchange value. The value expression has two poles, relative value form and equivalent form. The value expression, to consider first what holds for the commodity which functions as equivalent, it counts for another commodity as value structure, body in immediately exchangeable form, exchange value. The commodity, however, whose value is expressed relatively, possesses the form of exchange value, while one, its value being, is revealed by the exchangeability of another commodity body with it. Its value magnitude is expressed by the proportion in which the other commodity is exchangeable with it. The exchange value is thus, in a word, the independent form of appearance of the commodity value. Section 5. The simple value form of the commodity is the simple appearance form of the opposition of use value and exchange value contained in it. In the value relationship of the linen to the coat, the natural form of linen counts only as value form, or structure of exchange value. The inner opposition contained in the commodity of use value and value is thus manifested by an external opposition, that is, the relationship of two commodities, of which the one counts immediately only as use value, the other immediately only as exchange value, or in which both of the opposite determinations of use value and exchange value are apportioned among the commodities in a polar manner. If I say, as commodity, the linen is use value and exchange value, then this is the judgment concerning the nature of the commodity, which I have won through analysis. On the other hand, in the expression 20 yards of linen equals one coat, or 20 yards of linen is worth one coat, the linen itself says that it is one, use value, linen, two, exchange value, differing from that use value, a thing equal to a coat, and three, unity of both these differences, and thus is a commodity. Section 6. The simple value form of the commodity is the simple commodity form of the labor product. The labor product in its natural form brings the form of a use value along with itself into the world. Thus there is only a need for the value form in addition in order that it possesses the commodity form, i.e., in order that it appear as unity of the opposites, use value and exchange value. The development of the value form is consequently identical to the development of the commodity form. Section 7. Relationship of commodity form and money form. If one puts, in place of 20 yards of linen equals one coat, or 20 yards of linen are worth one coat, from 10 yards of linen equals 2 pounds sterling, or 20 yards of linen are worth 2 pounds sterling, then the first glance shows that the money form is absolutely nothing other than the further developed structure of the simple value form of the commodity, thus of the simple commodity form of the labor product. Since the money form is only the developed commodity form, hence it obviously originates in simple commodity form. Consequently, as soon as the latter is comprehended, the only thing left to consider is the sequence of metamorphoses which the simple commodity form 20 yards of linen equal one coat must pass through in order to assume the structure of 20 yards of linen equals 2 pounds sterling. Section 8. Simple relative value form and single equivalent form. The value expression in the coat gives the linen a value form through which it is distinguished only as value from itself as use value. This form places it, in addition, only into relationship to the coat, i.e., to some other single commodity type distinct from itself. But as commodity, it is the same as all other commodities. Its value form must consequently also be a form which places it into a relationship of qualitative equality and quantitative proportionality to all other commodities. The single equivalent form of one commodity corresponds to the simple relative value form of another commodity, or the commodity in which value is expressed only functions in this case as single equivalent. Thus the coat possesses in the relative value expression of the linen only equivalent form, or form of immediate exchangeability, with reference to this single commodity type, linen. Section 9. Transition from the simple value form into the expanded value form. The simple value form preconditions the fact that the value of a commodity be expressed in only one, but it is irrelevant which, commodity of another type. It is thus just as much a simple relative value expression of the linen of its value, if its value is expressed in iron or in wheat, etc., as if it is expressed in the commodity type coat. In accordance, thus, with whether it enters into a value expression with this or that other commodity type, there arise different, simple, relative value expressions of the linen. In possibility, it has just as many different, simple value expressions as there exist commodities of a type differing from it. Actually, its complete relative value expression does not consist in a solitary, simple relative value expression, but in the sum of its simple relative value expressions. Thus we obtain 2. The total or expanded value form. 20 yards of linen equals 1 coat, or 10 pounds of tea, or 40 pounds of coffee, or 8 bushels of wheat, or 2 ounces of gold, or 1/2 ton of steel, etc. Section 1. Endlessness of the sequence. The sequence of relative value expressions is, as far as its nature is concerned, constantly extendable or never ends, for new commodity types constantly appear, and each new commodity type forms the material of a new value expression. Section 2. The expanded relative value form. The value of a commodity, for example, linen, is now manifested in all other elements of the commodity world. Each other commodity body becomes a mirror of linen value. In this way, this value itself appears for the first time genuinely as coagulation of distinctionless human labor. For the labor which forms the linen value is now manifested expressly as labor in which every other human labor, whatever natural form it possesses, and regardless of whether it objectifies itself in coat or wheat or iron or gold, etc., counts as equal. Through its value form, the linen in consequence now also stands in social relationship, no longer to only one single other commodity type, but to the commodity world. It is as commodity that it is citizen of this world. At the same time, it lies in the endless sequence of its expressions, that the commodity value is indifferent towards each particular form of use value in which it appears. Section 3. The particular equivalent form. Each commodity, coat, tea, wheat, iron, etc., counts in the value expression as equivalent to the linen and consequently as value body, the determined natural form alongside of many others. Similarly, the manifold determined concrete useful labor types contained in the various commodity bodies now count as just so many particular realization forms or appearance forms of human labor as such. Section 4. Defects in the expanded or total value form. First, the relative value expression of linen is unfinished, since its sequence of manifestation never ends. Secondly, it consists of a variegated mosaic of value expressions, which fall asunder and are of differing types. Finally, if, as must happen, the relative value of each commodity is expressed in the expanded form, then the relative value form of each commodity is an endless sequence of value expressions differing from the relative value form of each other commodity. The defects of the expanded relative value form are reflected in the equivalent form corresponding to it. Since the natural form of each single commodity type is at this point a particular equivalent form, alongside countless other particular equivalent forms, there exist, in a word, only limited equivalent forms, each of which excludes any other. In precisely the same way, the determined concrete useful labor type contained in each particular commodity equivalent is only a particular, and thus not an exhaustive appearance form of human labor. The latter possesses its complete or total appearance form, to be sure, in the total environment of those former particular appearance forms. But it does not in this way possess any unified appearance form. Section 5. Transition from the total value form to the universal value form. The total or expanded relative value form, however, only consists in a sum of simple relative value expressions or equations of the first form, like 20 yards of linen equals 1 coat, 20 yards of linen equals 10 pounds of tea, etc. Each of these equations, however, contains conversely also the identical equation, 1 coat equal to 20 yards of linen, 10 pounds of tea equal to 20 yards of linen, etc. And in fact, if the possessor of the linen exchanges his commodity with many other commodities and thereby expresses the value of his commodity in a sequence of other commodities, then the many other possessors of commodities must necessarily also exchange their commodities with linen, and thereby express the values of their various commodities in the same third commodity, linen. Thus, if we reverse the sequence, 20 yards of linen equals 1 coat, or 10 pounds of tea, etc., that is, if we express the converse relationship, which is in itself implicitly contained already in the sequence, then we obtain 3, the universal value form, where 1 coat equals 20 yards of linen. 10 pounds of tea equals 20 yards of linen. 40 pounds of coffee equals 20 yards of linen. 8 bushels of wheat equals 20 yards of linen. 2 ounces of gold equal 20 yards of linen. Half a ton of iron equals 20 yards of linen. X of commodity A equals 20 yards of linen, etc. of commodities equals 20 yards of linen. Section 1. Altered structure of the relative value form. The relative value form now possesses an entirely altered structure. All commodities express their value simply, namely in one single other commodity body. In a unified manner, that is, in the other commodity body. Linen now counts to all various types of commodity bodies as their communal and universal value structure. The value form of a commodity, i.e., the expression of its value in linen, now not only distinguishes it as value from its own existence as use object, i.e., from its own natural form, but relates it at the same time as value to all other commodities. And that means to all commodities as like itself. It possesses in this value form, consequently, universally social form. It is only first through its universal character that the value form corresponds to the value concept. The value form had to be a form in which the commodities appear for one another as mere coagulations of distinctionless, homogeneous human labor, i.e., as thing-like expressions of the same labor substance. This it now achieves, for they are all expressed as materialization of the same labor, the labor contained in the linen, or as the same materialization of labor, namely as linen. In this way, they are set qualitatively equal. At the same time, they are quantitatively compared or manifested for one another as determined value magnitudes. For example, 10 pounds of tea equals 20 yards of linen, and 40 pounds of coffee equal to 20 yards of linen. Thus, 10 pounds of tea equals 40 pounds of coffee. Or in 1 pound of coffee, there lurks only 1/4 as much value substance, labor, as in 1 pound of tea. Section 2. Altered structure of the altered structure of the equivalent form. The particular equivalent form now has continued its development into the universal equivalent form, or the commodity situated in equivalent form is now universal equivalent. The natural form of the commodity body, linen, by counting as value structure of all other commodities, is the form of its indifference or immediate exchangeability with all elements of the commodity world. Its natural form is thus at the same time its universal social form. For all other commodities, although they are the products of labors of the most differing type, linen counts as appearance form of the labors contained in themselves. Consequently, as embodiment of homogeneous, distinctionless human labor. Weaving, this particular concrete labor type, counts. Thus, now, because of the value relationship of the commodity world to linen, as universal and immediately exhaustive realization form of abstractly human labor, i.e., of the expenditure of human labor power as such. The private labor contained in the linen also counts precisely for the same reason as labor, which is immediately situated in universally social form or in the form of equality with all other labors. If a commodity thus possesses the universal equivalent form, or functions as universal equivalent, its natural form or body form counts as the visible incarnation, the universal social larval stage of all human labor. Section 3. Uniform relationship of development of relative value form and equivalent form. The degree of development of the equivalent form corresponds to the degree of the development of the relative value form. But, and this is to be carefully noted, the development of the equivalent form is only an expression and result of the development of the relative value form. The initiative starts with the relative value form. The simple relative value form expresses the value of a commodity only in one single other commodity type, precisely in which being an indifferent matter. In this way, the commodity obtains only value form, in distinction to its own use value form or natural form. It is also only the single equivalent form which obtains its equivalent. The developed relative value form expresses the value of a commodity in all other commodities. These latter obtain in consequence the form of many particular equivalents, or particular equivalent form. Finally, the commodity world gives itself a unified, universal relative value form by shutting out from itself one single commodity type, in which all other commodities express their value communally. The commodity which has been shut out thereby becomes the universal equivalent form. Section 4. Development of the polarity of relative value form and equivalent form. The polar opposition, or the inseparable correlation and similarly unchanging mutual excluding of relative value form and equivalent form, so that one, a commodity cannot be situated in the one form without some other commodities being situated in the opposing form, and two, that as soon as a commodity is situated in the one form, it cannot be situated at the same time within the same value expression in the other form. This polar opposition of both moments of the value expression develops and hardens to the very same extent to which the value form as such develops or is unfolded. In Form 1, both forms already exclude each other, but only formally. In accordance with whether the same equation is read forwards or backwards, each of the two commodity extremes, like linen and coat, is situated uniformly now in the relative value form. Now in the equivalent form, it still requires an effort at this point to retain the polar opposition firmly in mind. In Form 2, it is in each case always and only one commodity type which is able to develop in relative value totally, its relative value totally. Or it poses on its own only developed relative value form, because and insofar as all other commodities are situated against it in the equivalent form. In Form 3, it is finally the commodity world, which only possesses universally social relative value form, because and insofar as all the commodities which belong to the commodity world are excluded from the equivalent form or from the form of immediate exchangeability. On the other hand, the commodity which is situated in the universal equivalent form, or figures as universal equivalent, is excluded from the unified and consequently universal relative value form of the commodity world. If linen, i.e. some one commodity situated in universal equivalent form, were also to participate at the same time in the universal relative value form, then it would have to be related to itself as equivalent. We then obtain 20 yards of linen equals 20 yards of linen, a tautology in which neither value nor value magnitude is expressed. In order to express the relative value of the universal equivalent, we must reverse Form 3. It does not possess any relative value form held communally with the other commodities, but rather its value expresses itself in a relative manner in the endless sequence of commodity bodies. So now the expanded relative value form, or Form 2, appears as the specific relative value form of the commodity which plays the role of universal equivalent. Section 5. Transition from the universal value form to the money form. The universal equivalent form is a form of value as such. It can thus inhere in each commodity, but constantly only in the exclusion of all other commodities. Meanwhile, the mere difference of form between Form 2 and Form 3 already reveals something peculiar, which does not make a difference between Forms 1 and 2. Namely, in the expanded value form, Form 2, a commodity excludes all others in order to express its own value in all the other commodities. This shutting out can be a purely subjective process. For example, a process of the linen possessor who estimates the value of his own commodity in many other commodities. On the other hand, a commodity is situated in universal equivalent form, Form 3, only because and insofar as it is itself excluded as equivalent by all other commodities. The excluding is in this case an objective process, independent of the excluded commodity. In the historical development of the commodity form, the universal equivalent form may inhere in turn now in this commodity, now in then. But a commodity never really functions as universal equivalent, except insofar as its excluding, and hence its equivalent form, is the result of an objective social process. The universal value form is the developed value form and consequently the developed commodity form. The labor products, which are materially wholly different, cannot possess ready-made commodity form and consequently cannot also function in the process of exchange as commodity without being manifested as thing-like expressions of the very same equal human labor. That means that in order to obtain ready-made commodity form, they must obtain unified universal relative value form. But they are only able to win this unified relative value form by excluding a determined commodity type from their ranks as universal equivalent, and only from the instance where this excluding is finally limited to a specific commodity type, has the unified relative value form one objective steadfastness and universally social validity. Now, the specific commodity type whose natural form, the equivalent form, is becoming socially intertwined, becomes the money commodity or functions as money. To play the role of universal equivalent within the commodity world becomes its specifically social function, and hence its social monopoly. The determined commodity which has historically conquered this privileged place among the commodities, which in Form 2 figures as particular equivalents of linen, and in Form 3 expresses their relative value together in linen, is gold. Consequently, if we place in Form 3 the commodity gold in place of the commodity linen, then we may obtain 4, the money form. Forgot my Roman numerals for a second. 4, the money form. So, for example, 20 yards of linen equals 2 ounces of gold. 1 coat equals 2 ounces of gold. 10 pounds of tea equals 2 ounces of gold. 40 pounds of coffee equals 2 ounces of gold. 1/2 ton of iron equals 2 ounces of gold. X of commodity A equals 2 ounces of gold, etc. of commodity equals 2 ounces of gold. Section 1. Difference in the transition of the universal value form to the money form from the earlier developmental transitions. Essential changes occur in the transition from Form 1 to Form 2, from Form 2 to Form 3. On the other hand, Form 4 does not differ at all from Form 3 except in the fact that now gold possesses the universal equivalent form instead of linen. Gold remains in Form 4 what linen was in Form 3, universal equivalent. Progress consists only in the fact that the form of immediate universal exchangeability, or the universal equivalent form, is now intertwined once and for all through social habituation with the specific natural form of the commodity body, gold. The only reason why gold confronts the other commodities as money is because gold already confronted them as commodity. Like all other commodities, gold also functioned as equivalent, whether as single equivalent in separate acts of exchange, or whether as particular equivalent alongside other commodity equivalent. Gradually, it came to function in narrower or broader circles as universal equivalent. As soon as it has conquered the monopoly of this place in the value expression of the commodity world, gold becomes money commodity. And only from the moment where it has already become a money commodity in Form 4, distinct from Form 3, or the universal value form, is changed into the money form. Section 2. Change of the universal relative value form into price form. The simple relative value expression of a commodity, for example, linen, in the commodity which already functions as money commodity, for example, gold, is price form. The price form of linen, hence, 20 yards of linen equals 2 ounces of gold. Or, if 2 pounds sterling is the money name of 2 ounces of gold, 20 yards of linen equals 2 pounds sterling. Section 3. The simple commodity form is the secret of the money form. It is clear that the actual money form does not in itself provide any difficulty. Just as soon as the universal equivalent form is penetrated, it no longer costs one the least sort of headache to comprehend that this equivalent form holds fast to a specific commodity type like gold, and all the less headache in that the universal equivalent form, from its nature, preconditions the social excluding of one determined commodity type by all other commodities. The only thing at issue left is that this excluding wins objectively social consistency and universal validity, and hence neither happens to different commodities in turn, nor possesses a merely local significance in particular circles of the commodity world alone. The difficulty in the concept of the money form is limited to the conceiving of the universal equivalent form, thus of the universal value form as such. Form 3. Form 3, however, is analyzed reversely into Form 2, and the constituent element of Form 2 is Form 1. 20 yards of linen equals 1 coat. Or X of commodity A equals Y of commodity B. Now, if one knows what use value and exchange value are, then one finds that this Form 1 is the simplest, most undeveloped manner of manifesting a random labor product. Like linen, for example, as commodity, that is, as unity of the opposites, use value and exchange value. One then easily finds at the same time the sequence of metamorphoses, which the simple commodity form, 20 yards of linen equals 1 coat, must pass through in order to attain its finished structure. 30 yards of linen equals 2 pounds sterling, i.e., the money form. I think this is funny. It says, the end.